Don't worry about the markers. I kind of see them.
Okay, I'll do a visual marker.
Visual.
You'll see that in the video.
Right, we need one of them little clipboards that go.
Yeah, the clappers.
Yeah.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to The Digital Difference. We are a podcast for IT leaders and anyone really interested in digital products, where we discuss ideas, news, and fresh perspectives about the web, apps, and all things technology. I'm here, Scott Gulliver, and I'm here with my co-host, Auburn.
Hello.
How you doing? You all right?
All right.
Good. Wow, what are we talking about today, Auburn?
God, that was too much energy for me, Scott. Today, boys and girls, we're talking about sustainability in what's the title? Sustainability in the web sustainability
in software. But yeah, I think all things tech, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a really good thing for us to talk about because sustainability is obviously an important subject at the moment.
Well, I didn't even know it was a thing, to be honest with you. You don't think like, oh no, green waste and emissions with the internet. I didn't think it was like an actual thing.
Yeah. No,
Until it's one of the researching that is. In other words, I'm naive. We'll go with that.
Yeah, and I certainly was, because the internet's quite like intangible, isn't it? We can't touch it, we can't see it, and it's hard to like. Obviously, we know that things are happening through servers and infrastructure that's actually in the real world. But
well, I'm a simpleton. I just picture it as like a cloud somewhere up there.
Yeah,
just chilling, no strings, just chilling in the cloud. No, it's not. There's databases. There's big buildings. There's electricity to keep it going, electricity to keep it cool, and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. It is, and like anything else, it's related to emissions, right? It's related to using energy, and even when we think about our devices, a lot of our devices are pretty power efficient these days and have better batteries. But everything we do on our phones, for example, all uses power, and it all needs to then be recharged at the end of the day. So it does all feed back. Sustainability is pretty high on agendas at the moment, isn't it, of various companies? It's pretty high on the list of things that they want to start looking at or need to start looking at, and which is a really positive thing. And from what I've seen so far, a lot of companies are thinking about things like the impact of their staff when they commute. They're thinking about how efficient their offices are. They're thinking about products they might be manufacturing, kind of real world products, and the emissions caused by those. And whilst the IT impact on the kind of planet and the sustainability element of it can be pretty low in comparison to some of those, it's still a real world stat that I think all companies can have an effort contributing to and improving. And like you said, Auburn, I think the first step is just really knowing that it's a thing, because a lot of us don't consider it to be a thing. And you were having a look at some stats, weren't you, in the research to this? Do you want to?
Yeah, so according to the escp.eu website, so if this is wrong, blame them, not me. Digital technologies are responsible for 4% of greenhouse gas emissions, and its energy consumption is increasing by 9% a year. 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's mad, considering it's something for me, I don't even comprehend as producing emissions. Yeah. The internet emits 1.6 billion annual tons of greenhouse gas emissions. God, if that's only 4%, that's mad. That's mad. Okay. The communications industry will represent 20% of all the world's electricity consumption by 2025. It's another scary one. And more than 50 million tons of e-waste were produced in 2019 alone, a number that's expected to rise by 8% each year.
Wow. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's obvious that all of this is only going to increase with more use. And so with all of this use, I think a lot of it comes back to the data centers, doesn't it? I think that's probably where a lot of the emissions are. A lot of, like you said, we put a lot of our stuff in the cloud. We certainly when we're developing things or making pretty much anything that we use these days in terms of applications, software we use for our businesses, they're all running in a cloud somewhere for the most part. And those data centers that run the apps that we use quite often aren't using renewable energy, which I think is where a lot of the consumption comes from. And there certainly are companies, we've got some local to us, for example, that are doing really great things to push the innovation of renewable data center tech. But yeah, I think from what I see, it's a really challenging problem because it's hard enough to get companies to move to quite expensive renewable energy. And you think about a data center that's using huge amounts of energy, and it's a real scale problem. So I think that is a big part of the issue. And certainly a lot of companies may see that as a reason that it's kind of out of their control, which I don't think it is, because certainly some data centers, and you can choose which providers you go with. Some of them are doing good things in the renewable space, but I think that's a large part of the reason why. Yeah. Good.
I'm nodding along. The thing is, I'm nodding along like acknowledging you, but people are listening and not seeing. So everyone thinks I'm just there, like playing on my phone. Or Sorry, right? I'll make an effort to verbally acknowledge. Yeah. Yes.
Good. I'm glad you found that as interesting as I did. Yeah, and I think so. Data centers are the big reason why those numbers and stats are so high. That's ultimately the big part of driving this. But there are ways that certainly web developers, app developers, software developers of any kind, and especially those working in things like artificial intelligence, anything with like vast amounts of data or storage, can start thinking about. And as with everything that we do as developers, I think it's about efficiency, and that applies across the board to developing better sustainability into our software.
So what is it that like developers like us who develop apps, websites, what is it that we do to like that isn't sustainable? So if that makes sense. Like what is it that we're doing wrong?
So the reason that so if you think about like a data center that's using all of the electricity that it needs to, it's using that electricity because it needs to provide power to servers and machines which are essentially running our applications. So the less efficient those applications are in terms of how long they run, how much data they send back and forth, how much data they send, how much they're doing basically, which we used to really be concerned about that stuff when we were running it on like in-house servers, because you would have a server that's running like 10 applications and it would be approaching the capacity level. Nowadays we throw it in the cloud and we don't worry about that stuff. It just scales. But the more efficient you can be, the less power your app will use, and ultimately for running it, for one, the less it's going to cost your company, because a lot of these cloud providers are charging you per like CPU minute or something. But also generally the more efficient you can make things. And again, it's like, we're talking fractions of one thing that's of tons of things running in a data center. But I think if there was a big step change in the industry, we could bring that 10% or whatever it was, or 20% for the communications industry down by a couple of percent. And it's all about marginal gains, isn't it? Which is a really big thing in tech as we start scaling it. Like in terms of the efficiency, I think there are a few wins, and web like sustainability has been one of the things that's been at the forefront of tech, because for so long we have, as companies, been driving people to our websites. That's a big goal is traffic and conversion on websites. And actually there's an interesting so firstly, like on that front, web technology specifically is a big driver of that, of data usage and usage in data centers. So it's the one thing where we can make a quick impact. And you can now go to websites, put in your URL, and it will actually tell you how much carbon you've emitted by visiting that page.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite cool. And I think measuring is really important, isn't it? Because we need to know like where it's at today and if we're improving or getting worse. Otherwise, it's really, really hard to know.
Yeah.
So they're a really good tool to use. But yeah, like we can. It's interesting that as companies, we've been trying to make people, like there was this old thing that we used to follow, which was we want people to go to visit a web page and then jump around as many other pages as they possibly can, keep them on our website as long as possible. And that used to be like the more clicks we get, the better. If they can navigate around 3 or 4 different pages, that's fantastic. But actually, every time they're doing that, they're requesting new resources. They're kind of continuing that journey. And that's going to impact as well. And there is a thought lately around actually, if we can get people to the information they exactly need as quick as possible on one web page, actually maybe that's a much more ethical way to do it in terms of both getting people to what they need, but also reducing the impact on the environment as well.
Oh, what? So like in the future, nav bars would be like thrown away. We'd all have it on one page.
Yeah, maybe. It's just about that UX, isn't it? And UX is a common thread throughout a lot of this. It's interesting how UX is so, like, it gets thrown around a lot. As a user experience. So,
okay.
And we've all started focusing on UX a lot more, but it's interesting how much it just affects everything else. Like good UX will ultimately, typically, provide good accessibility, which is another good thing to aim for. But it will also, hopefully, create a better, or much less resources being loaded for the user, which again impacts the environment. So good UX does seem to thread throughout almost every other kind of good thing we can aim for as well, which is why it's so important these days.
So specifically, how can we make like websites more efficient? So we said like less pages, but there's like examples where that's just not doable. People need multiple pages if they offer multiple things. So yeah, how exactly do we make it efficient?
Yeah, there are lots of ways, and the developers will be best placed to figure this stuff out. But the thing that tends to be most kind of taxing on CPUs and then energy efficiency are things like large resources. If, for example, you're loading large videos on your website, that can be pretty intensive in terms of data back and forth. Also, making sure that when we do have things that they are cached properly. So again, IT teams are quite used to doing this sort of thing, but making sure that things are as close to the user as possible, so it's not having to go through multiple data centers to get to where it needs to get to. And yeah, there are lots of ways to make minor improvements. So things like images, there are now formats like WebP, which are specifically created to be a very small file size, and when they're transferred from the data center to the device you're viewing that content on, it takes a small amount of a packet size as possible. So that sort of stuff is really important. And like I say, these are all about marginal gains, and ultimately all of this will impact loading time. It'll improve that for your website, which impacts things like SEO. So like this is all good stuff to be doing anyway. But ultimately it does have an impact on the environment as well, which is really cool. And video, I think, is really interesting because we are in such a like content first environment these days, aren't we? You look at an app like TikTok where we're scrolling through videos, like potentially a video every couple of seconds or so.
Oh yeah.
And you think about all of like the amount of data it's taken to get that to you, and we're just kind of throwing them away. It's an interesting culture that we're entering.
Like, it's loading them like crystal clear HD videos, and it's taking all that energy to load it, and then we just swipe it within 2 seconds if we find out it's just another shitty dance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's mad. You don't even think about it, do you? You don't even think about it.
No, and it may be that a lot of these apps are running on efficient hardware or efficient data centers that are using green energy. Like that may be true, but equally it impacts like the battery life of our devices, doesn't it? So
yeah,
I've had long sessions on games and other things where you have to recharge after a couple of hours just because you've drained the battery. So like it impacts everything. And I think
multi-layered, isn't it? It's multi-layered.
It is multi-layered, and it's going to keep getting worse. I think as our need for kind of content increases, we're in ever kind of an ever more throwaway world in that respect. We just need to make sure that things are as efficient as possible, I think. So the other thread to think about on the kind of flip side of all of this. So we now know that technology obviously has an impact on the environment to some degree, and there are ways that we can mitigate that. And actually, on that front, I mean, you mentioned, did you mention this time or before? I can't remember if it's now before or before the podcast, but you mentioned about e-waste being a thing. And
Yeah, that was in the stats. Let me just say. So yeah, more than 50 million tons of e-waste were produced in 2019 alone, a number that's expected to rise 8% each year.
yeah, and e-waste is huge, isn't it? So by e-waste, I imagine they're talking about kind of electronic devices that are being thrown away, ending up in landfills
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's a culture thing, isn't it? Like there is a big need for us always to have the latest device. There's a new one coming out every year. We have that kind of that FOMO of like wanting to have the latest thing. But then what happens to our old devices that are getting increasingly more robust and lasting longer? And making sure that they can be reused or that we can make use of old devices.
Shops. We've got a recycle shop in Stoke that takes in old devices and even wires and stuff, and they like strip them down and reuse them if they can. But I'm pretty sure they get like the copper out in there. So rather than going into landfill, at least it's going elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't quite know how they work, but yeah, that's a really good thing, of course. And I think firstly, like if we can make use of devices that are secondhand or refurbished to some degree, but there's an energy cost and everything, isn't there? I mean, transporting that to another person is an energy cost in terms of getting them down the road. Even recycling takes energy and effort, but of course, it's much better than it ending up in landfill, which is just it's crazy to think about. And there's been various efforts, haven't there? I mean, Google did a program a while back where they had that kind of modular phone where, in theory, you could replace specific parts just by popping them in and out. And this idea that you'd have like your core phone that would stay with you like for 10, 15 years maybe, and you just replace modules as they got upgraded. But yeah, I think as consumers, we still want things that are easy and new for the most part, don't we? So it's a big culture shift along with the things to develop that tech as well. And then on the flip side of all of this, we've been talking about how technology can cause problems in the environment. But I think there is equal part to say that technology may well be able to reduce emissions as well. So if we think about the amount of physical products that we don't use anymore because we use them on like a digital platform, things like books, things like notepads, all those types of things that have, again, genuine emissions from manufacturing goods. Technology can replace those. And you mentioned about the communications industry, actually, like we would have to rely on transport a lot more to get to people, whereas now video calls are a primary thing that we rely on. Yeah. So as well as the emissions increasing in that area, I suspect it's reducing emissions in other areas as well.
True. That's true. I wonder if there's stats out there about that. Like
probably.
Has alarm clock sales gone down because we've got alarm clocks on his phone, so it's saving energy in a big alarm clock warehouse.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I would imagine alarm clock sales have gone down.
Get the research, get it done. Let's have a look.
Yeah. And I think the research is interesting. You mentioned about stats, and stats are really hard to come by in all of this space, and it's hard to know with what lens it's being viewed at and who's doing that research, because there are large political things at play. There are people that are set to lose out on things like sustainability becoming a big thing at the forefront of what we do. But ultimately, like it's all about awareness, isn't it? And I think more people are caring about it and seeing it as a real thing. And if we can all make small changes in what we do, then that's got to be good, hasn't it?
Yeah. We also use, is it ecology?
Yeah.
Ecology. I don't know if that's really got anything to do with software sustainability, has it?
Well, I think from a tech point of view, it has. Again, it's another like interesting thing of where it's a tech platform that's probably by some degree causing emissions. Well, I suspect they're running on green platforms, but so Ecology is a platform we use to essentially automate payments. We automate payments to it for all of our employees, and by doing that, they run various programs to offset carbon emissions. But it's a nice, easy way, isn't it? Like that's the great thing about tech. Ultimately, is the way that it just makes things so accessible to people. Like we would probably never be going out to rebuild rainforests ourselves, but to be able to set up a payment online within 5 minutes and have that just done in the background is incredible, isn't it? And that's the power of technology, I think, to tie all these pieces together and bring it to people.
So someone's listening, because we're going to have hundreds and thousands of people listening to this podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
They're like, you know what? My company isn't very energy efficient there. It's embarrassing, I know it is. But Scotty G, wait, can I call you Scotty G on this podcast?
You can do, yeah.
Okay, Scotty G. What are my next steps? What do I want to be? I want to be like you. I want to save the environment, save the world. How can I do that?
Yeah, well, I think it's about firstly knowing where you are. So using some tools to measure exactly what your impact is. Like I say, there are business-wide schemes that can help with this as well, beyond just the technology. But just knowing where you are today, and it's not about let's apply a quick fix for tomorrow. It's about knowing where you are, having a plan, and really setting everyone towards it. So whether it be through small improvements to the user experience to help sustainability within your platforms within the next 5 years, whether it's moving your content and your technical infrastructure to green providers, and obviously all these things have a cost, so it's worth weighing that up as well. But just being aware, knowing that those alternatives are out there, and maybe making a plan to move in X many years. And of course, as a company, it's a great statement to make, to say that you're making strides and advances in the sustainability world. So I think it's all good things to look to do, even if it does impact the bottom line.
Could not have said it any better myself if I tried.
Well, there we go. Cool. Well, let's wrap this one up for today then. And this podcast has been a little late in terms of our regular schedule. We're hoping to be back within the next 2 to 3 weeks with a new episode. And I mean, thank you ever so much for joining us today. It's been great to speak to you about sustainability. I think it's a really interesting subject, and hopefully you've learned something along the way as well. We certainly did. Yeah, if there's anyone that you know that you think would like this podcast, please do share it with them. We're all about people expanding this to people that would love it. So that would really help us out. And thank you all. Thanks for joining me.
Cheers. God bless.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.